My name is Bill Lexi, and you'll notice that our topic is one of comparing developed and developing or emerging economies and really looking at the role of BOH. We added that too. I'm a graduate of the Federal Military Academy, and I came from this very small town that's not even here anymore because the mine closed and everybody, eventually urbanization took it over. But went from this very small community to a Federal Military Academy, dropped off, and it was the only time I went out of the state of Pennsylvania. And then as a third classman, which is our second year, they sent me around the world. I went to Taiwan, and this was in the mid-60s. I went to Taiwan, and they came down to the ship in bicycle-powered rickshaws to take us off and take us up to Keelung, the city. 3 years later, I went to that same city in the Navy, and they came down in Toyotas. They adapted to this new technology. You can imagine, I mean, what kind of trade-in do you get a bicycle rickshaw for a Toyota? Almost nothing. And it didn't cost but a nickel maybe to go uptown, so there wasn't much in the way of savings. But there was an adoption of this technology, a rapid adoption. 10 years after that, I was out of the Navy, and we had, I think at that time, we started companies here in Pittsburgh. And we had, I think it was 7 companies at that time. Eventually we had 15. And one of them was in a communications group. We had 5 groups. We started it, and we had 19 employees to begin with. Eventually we ended up with thousands. We bought a company from Decca, a radar company. And I went back to Taiwan, found one of these taxi cab drivers, who at that time, his father was a general in Taiwan, and found him and said, who could I have that would make me these solid state components? He said, I know just the person. He took me to his brother. So at that point in time, we went from bicycles to Toyotas to solid state manufacturing. When I hear John and Bopaya and the presentation, the great panel session that we had, as well as the speakers, I see a huge technology adoption and acceptance problem. One that me being an outsider in Taiwan didn't see. And of course, my friend up in the corner here, could you relay your story briefly?
About
the
farmers?
farmers?
Yeah. So when we're talking about disruptive technologies and their adoption in either emerging or advanced milieux, we often assume that it's a top-down process, that somebody has this and it's introduced in a favorable setting and it will be efficacious. In the case of the farmers, however, there is a presumption that they cannot make decisions on their own, and they are, in some sense, they have to be told what to do, what not to do. And the NGOs made a terrible mistake in trying to disabuse them of the adoption of GM modified BT cotton.
And not only the
Yes.
not only the NGOs, but also the government.
Absolutely. Even the government was dragging its feet. In some sense, the farmers voted with their plows and made BT cotton a reality in the teeth of this advice they were getting from international NGOs. And even the government, which was, which got paralyzed by this pressure from NGOs. Today, we are a leading power in exporting cotton to the rest of the world.
Because of
Yes.
the acceptance of GM.
Yes. They adopted it because it was in their interest. They got incomes. it solved a lot of their problems, whereas earlier they were devastated by crop losses. So this is one case where it's a cautionary tale, that you can't come as a snake oil salesman, that you got some technologies and expect them to be adopted. The community, they are rational. They can also vote and tell you what is it they want. and
They're
what-
rational and they're knowledgeable
Knowledgeable
about
as well.
their context.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And it is up to BOH to live in this realm if we are to be successful.
Yes.
So a lot of this is the foundation that our presentation will run by, correct?
Yep.
So, our first question was, what are the challenges of implementing DC from a BOH perspective? And we approached that from comparing those in developed economies and those with emerging economies. And we'll give you time to look at it, rather than me going through it. And attempts to integrate some of these items inside the operating mantra of BOH when comparing the developed economies where Homewood would stand and the emerging economies where India would stand. But you know, sometimes when I look at this, while my fine participants were putting them out, there's a blending here. Because we can't really consider Homewood as a strictly developed economy. And if our targets are going to be communities like Homewood, and we're going to use Homewood's example, not necessarily for the exact project, but the way to manage the project and the technology adoption and technology acceptance, that possibly we should consider these items and do research, such as on the last one, building a resilient community of knowledge at the local level. Not only trying to, I think is in the presentations that we had in the panel discussions, not only coming up with products and services, but spending time in that community, finding out the hierarchical structure, finding allies, finding people that we can bring in as mentors, who they would respect from other local communities. And also realizing, as I did when we started our companies, I had two sins. One was greed, not necessarily personal greed, but greed in the way of how I treated customers and employees. And the second one, when I went in and we had these companies, I had 3 degrees. I had guys in these companies from West Virginia, Pennsylvania. They didn't even graduate from grade school. But when problems came up, when applications had to be done with new technology, we would bring them all together. We would sit down with all of them, and we would give, as they gave their suggestions, time to all. And in time, they came to trust us. It took a couple meetings, actually more than a couple. But eventually, they felt comfortable enough to say, it may not be that way here. And their suggestion was necessary for the success. So as we look at this and as we talk and continue to develop our work with Homewood to build our relationships inside of India, and you'll notice that as we start working here, as we start going through our slides, you'll see a partnership developing, a network developing, a management process based on partners, based on networks. And I say partners, not suppliers, not customers, but partners. Because the goal for them to improve and for us to improve are the same. Please, go on. Do we have any questions? Because here, just direct all questions. Okay, what are the most significant barriers to entry in the spread of DC power? Again, take time, and you'll notice one of the key ones was this develop institution, government, community, social and psychological enablers. A lot of these items were thrown up here and took quite a time to analyze them. Even though it's a sentence, it requires a lot more research on our part. So part of what BOH, in their touch of us to do this, we've actually gone back to them and said, here are areas, because we are an educational institution, we are a research institution. We have, at the University of Pittsburgh, and now with our friends and partners in India, we have a great capability to conduct research. And we have people within our institutions that are eager to do it. We should be enablers of this. We should be supporters of this. And in the digital website that we have with blogs, with John, we should be able to generate easily accessible, understandable blogs. Not blogs that run on continually, but be ones that can be picked up easily by somebody outside the academic community, outside the developed community, and inside of these communities. That should be part of our mantras, to go into these communities and say, here is what we have. How can we make it better? How can we help you with this? How can we change it to make it more successful for you? So part of this is, how can we do our job better? Any questions? The third part, value proposition. This one is going to be not only context specific, technology specific, location specific. And so again, although I'm sure that John and Bopai asked us to make it simple, we've made it more complex, hopefully to make it more successful. Any comments? Please.
If I could go to the last bullet point.
Yes, sir.
And I was trying to avoid this because I need to go back to your previous bullet. In a sense, what you have is two concepts there, right? You've got entities.
Yes.
And then a characteristic of the enabler. So you're saying, basically, the social psychological considerations in relation to any of these should be.
Yes.
There's nothing that's. It's not
Yes.
individual.
This, and we separated ourselves from the technology.
Oh, okay, that's what you
The
wanted to do.
technology
Okay.
is under here.
I was wondering what you're trying to do.
Yeah, yeah. Because we don't really see the technology as steady state. We see the technology as evolving rapidly. As you and your partners are more and more successful, we see also our problem is keeping up with the technological
So
change.
that's the foot in the door, and then once you're in there, the technology will grow with their partner.
This is the table or the tea ceremony that you do with them so that you generate a trust, so you generate the ability to exchange.
But maybe there's more. Oh, yeah. It's terrific. Thank you.
Sorry. So, on this side are developing,
Yeah, I did, thank you.
on this side we have lessons, and you notice in developing, we come up with the identity because it gives these people, some of your customers who are out on a trail someplace 50 miles, 100 miles from what we would consider places to visit. We now say that you're important. That your concerns are held by more than just you. And then once you put this light bulb and put this fan, the next thing is an information system. Also, in later slides, and I want you to think about this now, we went back and looked at VOHs in this DC heart, and says, where do we focus? There is this huge scope of potential. Where should we focus? Us as a business school, as a community of knowledge covering many diverse areas, should we take the whole mantra on? Or should we narrow it down so when we look at DC power, because others are looking at light bulbs and fans, which are vital, should we look at creating economic enterprises? One of the slides we saw was of a young lady, a woman, sitting at a sewing machine, using that power to create cloth or dress. Is this what we should be focusing on? The ability for that household to generate money. That's what we do. We look at developed developed organizations and developed economies. We look at them. We know them. What we're creating now is a platform that allows, and in particular, those women in those far communities who have no power, who have no means of economic generation. We're allowing them to be a global citizen. Even countries like India, where marriage rape is not a law. These people in these communities, these ladies, these women in these communities are separated from us. We think BOH has the power to dramatically change lives of millions. Anything else you guys would want us to talk about on this? Please. Oh, excuse me. One more thing. On the developed world, oh, it's on the next one. You already did. We want to consider this equality of CO2 to kilowatts. The agreement that was done in Paris, we participated in some of the research for the negotiations, in particular between the U.S. and our role in the State Department and Department of Energy in the U.S. We participated in some of the discussions on how do we support an economy like India, looking at CO2. Because India's discussion with us basically was, hey, you've been polluting for 150 years. You've been making steel from the coal 150 years. Now you tell us we can't use coal. You tell us that we're going to need to put out on the streets 1.5 million people, wage earners, related to this coal. We need something else. So in our developed world, as we look at the benefits of DC power, it is related to our ability to reduce CO2 in our society, our developed society. There are benefits there. We also look at it that potentially research needs to be done looking at what kind of analytics should we measure, because here you have a utility in Pittsburgh, Duquesne Light. When I go to Costco, I can buy an LED bulb. They take $2 off. Duquesne Light pays for it because there is a regulation on how much power they can sell. They can't build any new power plants, so they have a regulation. Isn't that right? And that regulation controls them. So inside of them, we need ourselves to have better research in developed countries and how to make our case for CO2 control using DC power. There is a benefit to this. Part of our value proposition is how do we make a cost-benefit ratio understandable, usable by the public in developed countries. Anything else, Steve? The other thing is this better coordination with NGOs to share practices and also research and improvement of the existing business models in cultural context. We see business models, we see this area in developing countries as a fertile ground for growing and finding new business models. Business models that we over here don't think about. Such as the business model that you have in the way of building. If you go back 15 years, you have microfinancing. Where did it come from? India.
Bangladesh.
I'm sorry.
Same thing.
Target, not him, not me. But in that, it comes from an emerging economy, not from, and for 9 years I participated in Harvard's research for international strategy, and every year at one of our, at our conference on finance, somebody would produce a paper on this. Somebody. And they would not take credit for it, but man, they loved it. But it didn't come from Harvard. It came from there. And nobody in the large banks would accept a poor woman and give her $2 or $5 to finance her going in business, because they said, man, we'll never get our money back. They'll never pay us. 98% payback. 98, maybe 99 by now. 2 $5 loans, $10, something. Nothing to us, really, but a change of life to them. So we look at this BOH as a conduit to find out what other business models are there, or also enabler to say, can we assist you in trying new business models? And can those business models then be used over here? This is what we think is the core value proposition of DC Heart. It wasn't a task of ours. Ours was to also push value. But to me, it's value proposition. Okay? Next.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Any questions? Thank you for your time.
We didn't get to all the questions.